The dust devils danced across the main street of Socorro, New Mexico territory, carrying with them the stench of horse manure and broken dreams. It was August of 1882, and the sun beat down mercilessly on the weathered wooden buildings that lined the thoroughfare. Wanted posters fluttered against their nails like dying moths, each face staring out with hollow eyes that had seen too much of this unforgiving land. Caleb Boone stood before the sheriff's board, his shadow stretching long in the afternoon heat. At 34, he cut an imposing figure, 6 feet of lean muscle wrapped in trail-worn leather, with eyes the color of winter sky and a face carved by wind and regret. His hand rested easy on the Colt .45 at his hip, a gesture born of habit rather than threat. The badge of a bounty hunter glinted dully from his vest, tarnished by dust and indifference. "That's the one you're looking for," Sheriff Garrett said, jabbing a tobacco-stained finger at a newer poster. The paper was crisp white against the sun-bleached notices around it, the ink still dark. "Eliza Marin, the runaway bride. They're calling her—" Caleb studied the sketch, even rendered in crude lines. The woman's face held something that made him pause. High cheekbones, determined jaw, eyes that seemed to look through the paper rather than at it. The artist had captured something haunting in those features, something that didn't match the bold letters beneath. "Wanted for murder, $500 reward." "Killed her husband on their wedding night," Garrett continued, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Samuel Marin was a respected man, owned the biggest cattle ranch this side of the Rio Grande. Found him with a knife in his gut, blood all over their marriage bed. Girl vanished before the body was cold." Caleb pulled the poster from the board, folding it carefully. "How long ago?" 3 weeks now. Trail's getting cold, but folks say she was spotted heading south toward the Jornada del Muerto." The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "That's why they're offering good money. Nobody wants to chase a woman into the dead man's journey." The Jornada del Muerto, 90 miles of waterless hell that had claimed more lives than any Apache war party. Caleb had crossed it twice before, both times swearing never again. But $500 was more than he'd see in 6 months of regular hunting. "She traveling alone?" "Far as anyone knows, though a pretty woman don't stay alone long in these parts, if you catch my meaning." Caleb didn't respond. He'd stopped trying to understand what drove people to kill long ago. In his experience, everyone had their reasons, and those reasons died with them. His job was to bring them in, not judge them. The law could sort out guilt and innocence. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, 4 years back when he'd worn a cavalry uniform instead of trail clothes, when he'd had a wife named Sarah and a daughter named Emma, living in a tidy house at Fort Sumner. Before the raiders came, before he'd returned from patrol to find smoke rising from what used to be his home, his family reduced to charred bones in the ashes. The memory threatened to surface, but Caleb pushed it down where it belonged, in that cold place inside where he kept all the things that could still hurt him. He'd tracked those raiders for 3 months, found them celebrating in a cantina in Juarez. What he'd done to them had made him unsuitable for the uniform, but perfect for this work. "I'll take the job," he said, tucking the poster inside his vest. The hunt began at dawn. Caleb loaded his saddlebags with enough provisions for 2 weeks, hardtack, jerky, coffee, and 4 canteens of water. His horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Judge, stood patient as he checked the rifle in its scabbard and the spare ammunition in his bags. Every movement was methodical, practiced. In this land, preparation meant survival. The trail led south as expected, through settlements that grew smaller and meaner with each mile. At Los Lunas, a Mexican woman remembered seeing a lady in a torn wedding dress, trading her ring for food and a change of clothes. In Belen, a stable hand recalled a woman matching Eliza's description buying the cheapest horse he had, paying with coins that looked like they'd been pried from a dead man's eyes. Each stop painted a picture of desperation. The woman wasn't just running, she was disappearing, shedding her old life piece by piece. Caleb had seen it before in Fugitives, the gradual transformation from who they were to who they needed to become. But something about this trail felt different, too deliberate, too careful for someone who'd committed a crime of passion. 5 days out, he found the horse, a sway-backed mare lying dead by a dried creek bed, ribs showing through its hide. No sign of violence, just exhaustion and thirst. The tracks leading away were on foot, stumbling, weaving, a person at the end of their strength. The trail led to San Acacia, a dying town clinging to life at the edge of the Jornada. Here, the stories changed. The woman had worked 2 days at the church, helping tend to an old priest who was dying of consumption. She'd asked for no payment except water and a map showing the old Spanish wells. She had gentle hands. Father Miguel wheezed from his sickbed when Caleb questioned him. Not the hands of a killer. Even killers can have gentle hands. Padre. The priest's rheumy eyes fixed on him. Perhaps, but can they have gentle souls? This woman prayed over me, my son. She wept for my pain, whatever she's running from. It has wounded her deeper than any knife. Caleb left $1 on the priest's table and rode on. The Jornada stretched before him, an ocean of sand and scrub brush beneath a merciless sky. Only a fool or someone with nothing left to lose would attempt to cross it on foot. The woman had a day's head start. Maybe 2, in this heat. That could already be a death sentence. He found her on the 3rd day, at the ruins of an old mission church 20 miles into the desert. The walls had mostly collapsed, leaving only one corner standing against the endless blue sky. A figure moved in the shadows there, and Caleb approached with his hand on his gun. She was drawing water from an old well, the rope cutting into her palms as she hauled up the leather bucket. Her dress, once fine blue cotton, now faded and torn, clung to her sweat-soaked body. Dark hair that had probably been pinned up elegant for her wedding now hung in matted strands down her back. When she turned and saw him, there was no surprise in her eyes, no fear either, just a kind of weary acceptance, as if she'd always known this moment would come. She set down the bucket carefully, not spilling a drop, and stood waiting. "Eliza Marin?" "Yes." Her voice was cracked from thirst, but steady. "I'm taking you back to Socorro to stand trial." "I know." She held out her wrists without being asked, as Caleb bound them with rope. He noticed the calluses already forming on her palms, the sunburn across her cheeks, the way she swayed slightly on her feet, but also the straightness of her spine, the directness of her gaze. This wasn't how guilty people acted. In his experience, they ran, they fought, they begged. They didn't stand there like they were already dead and just waiting for the world to notice. "There's an old priest back there," she said as he checked the knots. "Father Miguel, he needs water brought up twice daily or he'll die. He's not your concern anymore." She looked at him then, really looked at him, and Caleb felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes were brown, deep brown like good earth after rain, and old in a way that had nothing to do with years. "Everything's someone's concern," she said quietly. "That's what makes us human." He didn't answer, just whistled for Judge and began preparing for the return journey. As he worked, a dust devil spun through the ruins, scattering sand against the ancient stones. Somewhere in the desert, a coyote called out, lonely and wild. The sun was setting by the time they were ready to leave, painting the desert in shades of blood and gold. Caleb helped Eliza mount behind him on Judge, her bound hands making it awkward. She didn't protest, didn't speak at all, but as they rode away from the mission, he heard her whisper something that might have been a prayer or might have been a goodbye. The first night would be the hardest. They'd have to find shelter before the temperature dropped, and the nearest water was still hours away. Caleb kept Judge at a steady walk, conscious of the woman's weight behind him, the way she struggled to stay upright despite her exhaustion. A sandstorm was building on the horizon, a brown wall of fury crawling across the desert toward them. They'd need shelter soon, or they'd be buried alive. The sandstorm hit them just after midnight, turning the world into a howling chaos of grit and darkness. Caleb had found a shallow cave in a rock outcropping, barely more than a depression in the stone, but enough to keep them from being buried alive. He pulled Eliza from the horse and pushed her inside. then fought to secure Judge in the lee of the rocks. When he crawled into the shelter, she was huddled against the back wall, her bound hands pressed to her face. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in as many minutes, and her thin dress offered no protection. Caleb could hear her teeth chattering even over the wind's fury. He pulled his bedroll from the saddlebags and wrapped it around her shoulders. She looked up at him, surprised. "Can't collect a bounty on a frozen corpse," he said gruffly, settling against the opposite wall. They sat in silence as the storm raged, the small space between them filled with swirling dust and unspoken questions. Hours passed. The cold deepened. Eventually, Caleb noticed she was shivering violently despite the blanket. "Come here," he said. She hesitated. "I'm not going to hurt you, but you'll catch your death if you don't warm up." She scooted across the sandy floor until she was beside him. He pulled her against his side, sharing what little heat his body offered. She was burning with fever, he realized, her skin hot even through the fabric of her dress. "How long since you had water?" he asked. "Yesterday. Maybe the day before." He cursed under his breath and fumbled for his canteen. "Drink, slowly." She took small sips, her bound hands shaking. Some of the water spilled down her chin, and she made a soft sound of frustration. "Have you killed many people?" she asked suddenly. The question caught him off guard. "What?" "You're a bounty hunter. Have you killed many people?" He considered lying, then decided there was no point. "Yes." "Did they deserve it?" "Some did, some probably didn't. Wasn't my place to decide." She was quiet for a long moment. "That must be a terrible weight to carry. No heavier than yours, I expect." She turned her face toward him, and in the dim light filtering through the storm, he could see the fever-bright shine of her eyes. "You think I killed my husband? Doesn't matter what I think. It matters to me." He didn't know how to answer that, so he didn't. The storm continued its assault on their shelter, and gradually, her shivering eased as the shared warmth took effect. Her head dropped against his shoulder, and he felt the moment when exhaustion finally claimed her. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the desert scoured clean. Eliza's fever had broken during the night, soaking through her dress and his shirt where she leaned against him. Caleb eased away from her carefully and went to check on Judge. The horse had weathered the storm well enough, though his eyes were red-rimmed from the dust. Caleb fed him a handful of grain and checked their water supply. They were down to 3 canteens. It would have to be enough. When he returned to the cave, Eliza was awake, trying to smooth her tangled hair with her bound hands. "There's a stage station at Paraji," he said. "Day's ride if we push. Can you make it?" "Do I have a choice?" "There's always a choice. You could die out here instead." She gave him a look he couldn't quite read. "Would that be easier for you, not having to drag me back? My job is to bring you in alive if possible, dead if necessary." How pragmatic. She struggled to her feet, swaying slightly. "I'm ready." The day's journey was brutal. The sun climbed high and merciless, turning the desert into a furnace. Eliza rode behind him, her arms wrapped around his waist to keep from falling. He could feel her growing weaker as the hours passed, her grip loosening, her weight shifting dangerously. They were 5 miles from Paraje when the raiders appeared. 3 men materialized from a dry wash, spreading out to block the trail. Caleb recognized the type immediately: desert scavengers who preyed on travelers too weak or foolish to defend themselves. Their leader, a Mexican with a scarred face and silver-studded gun belt, smiled, showing gold teeth. Amigo," he called out. "That's a pretty bird you got there. Maybe you share." "No?" Caleb's hand moved to his gun. "Right on. This doesn't concern you." "But it does. Friend. See, we know who she is. Worth $500. That one." "Split 3 ways. That's better than splitting with you." "Si." The other 2 men were already moving to flank them. Caleb calculated distances, angles, probabilities. 3 guns against 1. Eliza helpless behind him. Judge already tired from the hard ride. "I'll make this simple. Caleb said. "You ride away now. You live. You don't. You die. Choose." The Mexican laughed. "You got cojones, bounty man. But you're outnumbered. I've been outnumbered before." Something in his voice must have warned them. The Mexican's smile faded, and his hand dropped toward his gun. Caleb drew and fired in one motion. The Mexican fell backward, a hole where his right eye used to be. The second man got his gun half drawn before Caleb's bullet took him in the chest. The third managed to fire once, the shot going wide, before Caleb put him down with a bullet to the throat. It was over in 3 seconds. 3 men dead in the dust, their blood soaking into the thirsty ground. Judge danced nervously, disturbed by the gunfire and the smell of death. Caleb felt Eliza trembling against his back. "You all right? You killed them all." "They didn't give me a choice." "There's always a choice," she said, throwing his own words back at him. "You said so yourself." He didn't answer, just reloaded his Colt and urged Judge forward. They left the bodies for the vultures. Paraje was a miserable collection of adobe buildings clustered around a well. The stage station was the only 2-story structure, its upper floor reserved for travelers desperate enough to pay for a flea-infested bed. Caleb left Eliza with the judge and went inside to arrange a room. The station master was a thin man with nervous eyes who kept glancing at the door. "Just you?" "Me and a prisoner. 1 room, 1 night. That'll be $2. 4 if you want food." Caleb paid for both and returned to find Eliza slumped against Judge's side. Her face was pale beneath the sunburn, and when he helped her down, he noticed blood on the saddle. "You're hurt." She looked down at her side, where a dark stain was spreading across her dress. "I think when they were shooting." The third man's wild shot hadn't been so wild after all. Caleb cursed and half-carried her into the station. The wound was a graze along her ribs, not deep but bleeding steady. He laid her on the narrow bed in their room and fetched water and bandages from his saddlebags. "This is going to hurt," he warned, cutting away the bloodied fabric. "Everything hurts," she murmured. "What's a little more?" He cleaned the wound as gently as he could, but she still gasped and bit her lip until it bled. The graze was longer than he'd thought, running from her lower ribs almost to her hip. As he wrapped the bandages around her middle, he tried not to notice the other marks on her skin, older bruises, faded but still visible, in the shape of fingers on her arms, her shoulders. "Your husband," he said quietly. "He hurt you." It wasn't a question. She closed her eyes. "Please don't." "Don't what?" "Don't be kind to me. It's easier if you're not kind." He finished with the bandages and pulled a clean shirt from his bags. "Put this on. Your dress is ruined." She struggled to change with her hands still bound, and finally, he cut the ropes. She rubbed her wrists, looking at him with those dark, unreadable eyes. "Aren't you afraid I'll run?" "Where would you go? We're 50 miles from nowhere in every direction." She pulled on his shirt, which hung on her like a tent. "Thank you." "For what?" "For saving my life. Those men would have—" "They'd have killed us both after they were done with you." I wasn't being noble. She studied him for a long moment. "You really believe that, don't you? That nothing you do comes from goodness. Goodness is a luxury I can't afford. Or a pain you can't bear," she said softly. He turned away, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. "Get some rest. We leave at first light." That night, he sat by the window keeping watch while she slept. The desert was quiet except for the distant howl of coyotes and the whisper of wind through the sage. He found himself glancing at her more than he should, watching the rise and fall of her breathing, the way she curled into herself like she was trying to disappear. She'd asked if he'd killed many people. The truth was, he'd stopped counting after the first dozen. It was easier that way, to let them blur together into a faceless mass of bounties collected and justice served. But sometimes, in the quiet hours like these, their faces came back to him. Men and women who'd made bad choices, desperate choices, human choices. He'd told himself their guilt or innocence wasn't his concern. But that was a lie he'd grown comfortable with. Now here was this woman, accused of murdering her husband, and nothing about her felt right. Killers had a look, a smell, a way of moving through the world. Eliza Marin had none of it. What she had was the look of someone who'd been broken and was still trying to figure out how to put the pieces back together. He thought of Sarah, how she'd looked at him the morning he'd left on that last patrol, the kiss she'd planted on his cheek, laughing at his complaints about having to miss Emma's birthday. "We'll celebrate when you get back," she'd said. "I'll make your favorite cake." There had been no cake, no celebration, just ashes and the echo of screams he hadn't been there to hear. Eliza stirred in her sleep, murmuring something that sounded like a prayer or a plea. Without thinking, Caleb moved to the bed and pulled the thin blanket up over her shoulders. She opened her eyes, looking up at him in the moonlight. "I dream about it," she whispered. "Every night, the blood, his face, the way he looked at me when he realized." "Realized what?" "That I wasn't going to let him do it anymore." A tear slipped down her cheek. "Does that make me a murderer?" He didn't answer because he didn't know. The law said yes. His job said yes. But sitting there in the darkness with her tears silent on her face, nothing felt that simple anymore. They left Paraji before dawn, riding into mountain country where the trail wound between towering rocks and ancient pines. The elevation brought blessed coolness after the desert's furnace heat, but also new dangers. These mountains were known for flash floods that could turn a dry canyon into a raging torrent in minutes. Eliza rode behind him, her arms loose around his waist. The wound in her side had stiffened overnight, and he could feel her flinch with each of Judge's steps. They'd need to find proper shelter soon. Let her rest and heal. But every delay meant greater risk of other bounty hunters catching up, or worse, vigilantes who wouldn't bother with a trial. By midday, they reached Skeleton Canyon, a narrow defile carved by centuries of violent water. The walls rose 200 feet on either side, striped red and white like old blood and bone. Caleb had always hated this passage. Too many places for ambush, nowhere to run if trouble came. They were halfway through when the sky darkened. Not the slow gathering of storm clouds, but a sudden shift from blue to black. Thunder rolled through the canyon like artillery fire. "We need to get to high ground," Caleb said, spurring Judge forward. But the rain came too fast, too hard. Within seconds, they were soaked through. Within minutes. Caleb heard the sound every traveler in these mountains feared. A roar like a freight train bearing down from upstream. "Flash flood!" he shouted. "Hold on!" He wheeled Judge toward a ledge he'd spotted earlier. 15 feet up the canyon wall, the horse scrambled for purchase on the loose scree, hooves sliding. Behind them, a wall of brown water rounded the bend, carrying trees and boulders like toys. Judge made a desperate leap for the ledge just as the flood hit. The force of it slammed into the horse's hindquarters, spinning them around. Caleb felt Eliza's arms tighten convulsively around him. Then suddenly, she was gone, torn away by the water's fury. He caught a glimpse of her being swept downstream, her dark hair fanning out in the muddy torrent. Without thinking, he dove from Judge's back into the flood. The water was like being inside a cement mixer filled with knives. Debris battered him from all sides. Branches, rocks, pieces of metal from some long-ago wagon disaster. He fought to keep his head above water, searching desperately for any sign of Eliza. There, a flash of pale fabric caught on a deadfall tree. He swam toward it with everything he had, lungs burning, muscles screaming. His hand closed on cloth just as the tree began to break apart under the water's assault. He pulled her against him, one arm around her waist, the other grabbing for anything solid. His fingers found a root protruding from the canyon wall, and he held on, both of them dangling in the current like rag dolls. The flood raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When it finally began to subside, Caleb dragged them both onto a muddy shelf barely wide enough for two people. They lay there gasping, coughing up brown water. Eliza was unconscious, blood seeping from a gash on her forehead. Caleb checked her breathing, shallow but steady. The wound in her side had reopened, fresh blood mixing with the mud that covered them both. He looked around, trying to get his bearings. They were at least a mile downstream from where they'd started, trapped on a ledge 30 feet up the canyon wall. Judge was nowhere to be seen. Their supplies, weapons, everything gone. As the adrenaline faded, Caleb became aware of his own injuries. His right shoulder felt like it had been wrenched from its socket, and something sharp had laid open his thigh. But they were alive. Somehow, impossibly, they were alive. Eliza stirred, moaning softly. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then sharpening as memory returned. "You came after me," she whispered. "Yeah, well, still can't collect a bounty on a corpse." She tried to laugh but ended up coughing. "You're a terrible liar." Caleb Boone. It was the first time she'd said his name. Something about the way it sounded in her mouth made him uncomfortable. "Can you climb?" he asked, deflecting. She tried to sit up, gasped, and fell back. "I don't think so." He assessed the canyon walls. The ledge they were on connected to what looked like an old mining trail about 50 feet up. It would be a hard climb for someone healthy. For 2 injured people, 1 barely conscious. "There's a cave," Eliza said, pointing weakly. "Behind those rocks." He saw it, a dark opening partially hidden by fallen boulders. It wasn't much, but it would give them shelter while they figured out what to do next. The cave turned out to be an old mining claim, abandoned decades ago by the look of it. Rusted tools lay scattered about, and someone had built a crude fireplace near the entrance. Best of all, there was a cache of supplies in the back, moldy blankets, some canned goods, even a battered coffee pot. Caleb made Eliza as comfortable as possible on the driest blankets, then set about taking inventory. No weapons, no medical supplies, no way to signal for help. But they had shelter, and the rain had left puddles of relatively clean water in the rock hollows. He built a small fire with wood debris from the flood and heated water in the coffee pot, tearing strips from his shirt. He cleaned Eliza's wounds again. The head gash wasn't as bad as it looked, but the reopened wound in her side worried him. "Tell me about your daughter," Eliza said suddenly as he worked. His hands stilled. "What?" "You had a daughter. I can see it in your eyes sometimes. The way you look at nothing and see everything." "What was her name?" "How did you—" "My sister had the same look after she lost her baby. Like part of her soul went with the child." She winced as he pressed the cloth to her side. "What was her name?" "Emma." The word felt rusty in his mouth. "Her name was Emma. How old?" "4. She would have been 4. Eliza reached out and touched his hand. "I'm sorry." He pulled away. Don't what? Don't be human? Don't care that you're in pain. You don't know anything about it. I know you blame yourself. I know you think if you suffer enough, hate yourself enough, maybe it will balance the scales somehow." Her voice was soft but relentless. "It won't. Stop talking." "I know because I do the same thing. Every night, I see Samuel's face. I feel the knife going in, the way his body jerked. I tell myself I had no choice. But that doesn't make it easier. It doesn't bring him back. He beat you." The words came out harsher than Caleb intended. "I saw the bruises." "Yes, he forced himself on you." Her silence was answer enough. "Then he got what he deserved." She shook her head slowly. "Nobody deserves to die like that. In fear, in pain, knowing the person who's supposed to love them is the one holding the knife. He didn't love you. No, but I was supposed to love him. That's what wives do, isn't it? Love, honor, and obey. Till death do us part." A bitter smile curved her lips. "I kept that last bit, at least." They sat in silence as the fire crackled and rain continued to fall outside. The cave felt like a world apart from everything. The law, the bounty, the choices that had brought them here. "Tell me about Emma," Eliza said eventually. "What was she like?" Caleb found himself talking before he could stop. About Emma's laugh that sounded like bells. Her insistence on wearing her Sunday dress every day. The way she'd wait by the gate for him to come home from patrol, running full tilt into his arms. She had Sarah's eyes, he said, green like spring grass, but my stubborn streak. Once she decided on something, there was no changing her mind. She sounds wonderful. She was... He stared into the fire. They both were. The men who killed them? Dead. I found them in Mexico. Spent 3 days making sure they knew why. Eliza absorbed this without judgment. Did it help? No, but you kept hunting. It's all I know how to do anymore. Track, hunt, kill when necessary. The badge gives it legitimacy, but we both know what I really am. A man in pain, she said simply. The words hung between them like a challenge. Caleb stood abruptly, needing distance. I'm going to scout for a way up. Stay here. Where would I go? He left her by the fire and picked his way through the rain to the canyon wall. The old mining trail was accessible, but it would be a dangerous climb. They'd have to wait for morning, hope the weather cleared. When he returned to the cave, Eliza had managed to heat some of the canned beans they'd found. She'd divided them carefully onto 2 rusted plates. You need to eat, she said. They shared the meager meal in companionable silence. Outside, thunder rolled through the mountains like God clearing his throat. Inside, the fire painted shadows on the walls. And for a moment, Caleb could almost pretend they were just 2 travelers sheltering from a storm. In the morning, I'll climb out and find help, he said. And turn me in. It's my job. I know. She set down her plate and looked at him directly. But tonight, could we just be Caleb and Eliza, not hunter and prey, just 2 people who saved each other's lives? The firelight caught in her eyes, turning them to amber. Her hair had dried in wild curls around her face. Even battered and muddy, there was something about her that made his chest tight. All right, he heard himself say. They talked through the night as the storm raged outside. She told him about growing up in Ohio, dreams of being a school teacher before her father decided she needed a husband more than education. He found himself sharing stories he hadn't told anyone, funny moments with Sarah, Emma's first words, the life he'd lost and couldn't stop mourning. As dawn approached, exhaustion finally overtook them. The rain had stopped, leaving only the drip of water from the cave mouth. They lay on opposite sides of the dying fire, close enough to share warmth but not touching. Caleb? Eliza's voice was soft in the darkness. Yeah? Whatever happens tomorrow, thank you for seeing me as human. He stared at the cave ceiling, throat tight. Get some sleep. But sleep wouldn't come. He lay there listening to her breathing even out, thinking about justice and mercy, duty and choice, thinking about a woman who'd killed to survive and a man who'd survived by killing. When the first pale light of dawn touched the cave mouth, Caleb rose quietly. He stood over Eliza's sleeping form, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the way her hand curled beneath her chin. Then he turned and walked to the cave entrance to face whatever the day would bring. Behind him, Eliza opened her eyes. She'd been awake the whole time, watching him through her lashes, seeing the war play out on his face. She knew what he had to do, just as she knew what she had to do. But for now, in this moment between night and day, they were just 2 broken people who'd found something unexpected in each other, something that might be worth more than bounties or justice or even survival. Something that felt dangerously like hope. The climb out of the canyon took most of the morning. Caleb's shoulders screamed with every handhold, and twice he had to stop Eliza from falling when her strength gave out. By the time they reached the mining trail, both were trembling with exhaustion. Fortune smiled on them in the form of an old prospector named Josiah, heading down the mountain with his mule. He took one look at their condition and offered to help without asking questions. Mountain folk knew better than to pry into other people's troubles. Josiah's mule carried Eliza while Caleb walked alongside, trying not to limp from his injured leg. They reached the mining town of Silver Creek by late afternoon, a rough collection of saloons, supply stores, and boarding houses clinging to the mountainside like barnacles. Caleb used the last of his hidden money to secure a room at Ma Henley's boarding house. A relatively clean establishment that asked no questions if you paid in advance. He signed the register as Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, ignoring the knowing look from Ma Henley. "Hot water's extra," she said, eyeing their muddy clothes. "But you look like you need it." In their room, Caleb helped Eliza to the bed. Her fever had returned, and the wound in her side was angry red beneath the makeshift bandages. "I need to find a doctor," he said. "No." She grabbed his wrist. "They'll ask questions. Report to the sheriff." She was right. Any doctor would recognize a bullet graze. Would want to know how Mrs. Johnson came by such an injury. Caleb ran his hand through his hair. Frustrated. "I'll get medical supplies. Clean bandages. Carbolic acid. You'll have to trust me to tend it properly." "I trust you." The simple statement hit him harder than it should have. When was the last time anyone had trusted him with anything beyond bringing in a bounty? He spent the last of his money at the general store, adding a bottle of whiskey to the medical supplies. The shopkeeper, a thin man with careful eyes, studied him as he counted out the coins. "You're the bounty hunter, Boone, isn't it?" Caleb's hand instinctively moved to where his gun should be. "You're mistaken." "Don't think so. Saw you pass through last year. Bringing in the Garrett brothers?" The man leaned forward. "There's talk about a woman. Runaway bride from Socorro. Worth $500. Like I said, you're mistaken." The shopkeeper shrugged. "My mistake then. But if I were a bounty hunter who'd lost his quarry in that flood yesterday, I'd be interested to know that Pinkertons are in town, asking questions, showing that same wanted poster." Caleb kept his expression neutral as he gathered his purchases. Pinkertons meant the Marin family had hired private agents. They wouldn't be bound by the same rules as lawmen. Wouldn't care about bringing Eliza in alive. Back in the room, he found Eliza trying to clean her wound herself. Teeth gritted against the pain. He took the cloth from her hands. "Let me." She lay back as he worked, cleaning the wound properly this time. The carbolic acid made her gasp, her hands fisting in the bed sheets. He poured whiskey on a clean cloth and pressed it to the gash. "Drink this." He handed her the bottle. She took a long swallow, coughing as it burned down her throat. "Trying to get me drunk. Mr. Boone. Trying to keep you from screaming when I stitch this closed." Her eyes widened. "You know how to do that?" "Learned in the cavalry. Had plenty of practice on myself since then." He threaded a needle with a silk thread from the sewing kit he'd purchased. "This is going to hurt." "Everything hurts," she said, echoing her words from before. But this time, she reached for his free hand, lacing their fingers together. He worked as quickly as he could, making small, neat stitches to close the wound. She never screamed, though tears streamed down her face, and her grip on his hand threatened to break bones. When it was done, he bandaged the area and helped her into a clean shirt he'd bought. "There are Pinkertons in town," he said quietly. "Looking for you." She closed her eyes. "How long do we have?" "Maybe a day, less if that shopkeeper talks. You should turn me in, collect your bounty before they do." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Below, Silver Creek went about its rough business. Miners heading to their shifts. Prostitutes calling from balconies. A drunk being thrown from a saloon. It was the kind of town where people minded their own business. But $500 could change that quick. "There's a man here owes me a favor," he said finally. "Runs forged papers out of his print shop. New names, new lives, costs plenty. But what?" He turned to face her. "But you'd have to disappear completely. Never contact anyone from your old life. Never stop looking over your shoulder." "That's already my life." "And mine? What happens to the famous Caleb Boone when he lets a bounty slip away?" She struggled to sit up, fixing him with those dark eyes. "You become someone else, too, someone who chose mercy over money. I can't—" "Yes, you can." She held out her hand. "Come here." Against his better judgment, he sat on the edge of the bed. She touched his face, her palm warm against his cheek. "You died 4 years ago," she said softly. "When you lost them. Everything since has been just going through the motions. I know because I've been dead inside too, since long before that night with Samuel. He wanted to pull away, but found himself frozen by her touch, her words. "Maybe we can't bring back who we were," she continued. "But maybe we can become something new, together." "Eliza," she kissed him, soft at first, tentative, then with growing hunger as he responded. 4 years of ice around his heart cracked like spring thaw. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, careful of her injuries but desperate for the contact. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. "This is madness," he said. "Yes, they'll hunt us both now. Yes, I'm not a good man. Eliza, I've done things. So have I." She pressed her forehead to his. "But maybe that's why we understand each other. Maybe broken people can fit together in ways whole ones can't." He kissed her again. Decision made. To hell with the bounty. To hell with his reputation. To hell with everything that wasn't this woman and this moment and this chance at something besides death and duty. They made love slowly, carefully, mindful of wounds both physical and otherwise. It wasn't about passion so much as connection. Two lonely souls finding harbor in each other. Afterward, they lay entwined, watching shadows lengthen across the ceiling. "Tell me about Mexico," she said. "What's it like? Hot, dusty, full of people who don't ask questions if you keep to yourself." "Sounds perfect." He traced patterns on her bare shoulder. "There's a village I know, San Miguel, up in the mountains where it's cooler. A man could ranch there, raise horses maybe. A man and his wife? If she could stand such a life, it wouldn't be easy. Easy is overrated." She turned to look at him. "When do we leave?" "Tonight. The Pinkertons will expect us to run north or east, back to civilization. We go south instead, through Apache country. It's dangerous, but you know the territory. I spent 2 years hunting men through those mountains. I know every waterhole, every hidden pass." She was quiet for a moment. "What about the print shop, the papers?" "Too risky now. We'll have to manage without them. So we just disappear? Like smoke." A knock at the door made them both freeze. "Mr. Johnson?" Ma Henley's voice. "You've got visitors." Caleb was already moving, pulling on his clothes, looking for weapons he no longer had. He pressed his finger to his lips, then called out, "One moment." He opened the door a crack. Ma Henley stood there looking nervous, and behind her, 2 men in dark suits and bowler hats. Pinkertons. "These gentlemen are looking for someone," Ma Henley said, her eyes trying to convey a warning. "I told them I hadn't seen any single women come through." The lead Pinkerton, a thin man with cold eyes, pushed forward. "Pardon the intrusion. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Johnson. We're looking for a woman named Eliza Marin, about 25, dark hair, traveling alone. She's wanted for murder. Sorry, can't help you." The man's eyes tried to see past him into the room. "You're sure? There's a substantial reward. Like the lady said, no single women here." The second Pinkerton spoke up. "Funny thing, though, shopkeeper says a man matching the description of bounty hunter Caleb Boone bought medical supplies earlier. Now why would a bounty hunter need bandages and carbolic acid?" Caleb kept his expression neutral. "Don't know any Caleb Boone." "No? Tall man, dark hair, scar on his jaw just like yours?" The lead Pinkerton smiled thinly. "See, we think this Boone found the woman, maybe got sweet on her, decided to keep her for himself instead of turning her in. That would be a real shame. Wouldn't it, Mr. Johnson? Sounds like a fairy tale to me." "Does it?" The man's hand moved to his coat, where the bulge of a gun was visible. "Because fairy tales have a way of ending badly for everyone involved." Ma Henley stepped between them. "Now, gentlemen, this is a respectable establishment. If you're not renting a room, I'll have to ask you to leave." The Pinkertons exchanged looks. The lead man tipped his hat. "Of course, ma'am. Our apologies." He looked past her at Caleb. "We'll be around town for a few days, in case anyone's memory improves." They left, but Caleb knew they'd be watching the boarding house now. He closed the door and turned to find Eliza dressed and standing by the window. "How many in the alley?" he asked. "One, trying to look casual." "They'll have someone on the front, too." She moved away from the window. "So we're trapped?" "No, just need to be creative." He pulled on his boots. Mind racing. "There's a laundry chute at the end of the hall. Leads to the basement. From there, we can get to the stables. And then, steal horses. Ride hard for the border. That's your plan? Steal horses and run? Unless you've got a better idea." She smiled, and it transformed her face. "Actually, I do." Eliza's plan was audacious in its simplicity. Instead of running, they'd hide in plain sight until the Pinkertons moved on. Ma Henley, it turned out, had no love for private lawmen after they'd wrongly accused her son of theft years ago. For a price, she agreed to help. That night, Caleb became a miner named Tom Harper, complete with worn overalls and coal dust worked into his skin. Eliza transformed into his pregnant wife, padding beneath her dress and a bonnet hiding her face. Ma Henley spread word that the Johnsons had slipped out the back, heading north. For 3 days they maintained the charade. Caleb worked a shift at the silver mine, coming home covered in legitimate dirt and exhaustion. Eliza played the devoted wife, keeping to their room, speaking to no one. The Pinkertons searched every northbound stage, questioned every traveler, but never looked twice at the tired miner and his expecting wife. On the 4th night, the Pinkertons finally gave up and rode out. Following false leads Ma Henley had carefully planted. Caleb and Eliza waited one more day to be sure, then prepared to leave. But their escape came at a cost. Word had spread about Caleb Boone helping a fugitive. His reputation, built over 4 years of reliable service to the law, was destroyed. There would be no going back to his old life, even if he wanted to. They left Silver Creek before dawn, riding 2 horses Caleb purchased with money Ma Henley found in a room the Pinkertons had vacated. The old woman hugged Eliza at the door. "You take care of each other," she said. "Don't look back." They rode south as planned, skirting the main trails. The Apache country was dangerous, but Caleb knew it well. He'd tracked 3 men through these mountains 2 winters ago, learning every hidden spring and sheltered valley. On their 2nd day out, they encountered someone Caleb had hoped never to see again. Deputy U.S. Marshal Jim Thornton sat his horse in the middle of the trail, badge glinting in the morning sun. He was alone, which meant either confidence or stupidity. With Thornton, it was usually both. "Caleb," he said, not reaching for his gun. "Been a while." "Jim." Caleb kept his hands visible but ready. "You're a long way from your jurisdiction. Federal badge goes anywhere." Thornton's eyes moved to Eliza. "Ma'am, you'd be the widow Marin, I suppose." Eliza said nothing, but Caleb felt her tense behind him. "Now this is awkward," Thornton continued. "See, you and I rode together back in the cavalry, saved each other's lives more than once. Makes it hard to do what I've got to do, which is take her in, take you in too, now that you've thrown in with a fugitive." He sighed. "Why'd you do it, Caleb? You were the best bounty hunter in the territory. Clean record, good reputation. Why throw it all away for some woman?" Caleb thought about how to answer that, how to explain the moment in the flood when he'd chosen her life over his job. The night in the cave when she'd seen through his armor to the broken man beneath. The way she'd kissed him like he was worth saving. "Because I was dead, Jim, walking around, breathing, but dead inside. She woke me up." Thornton was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah wouldn't want you to—" "Don't!" Caleb's voice turned dangerous. "Don't you dare speak her name." "All right, but I've still got a job to do, so do it." They stared at each other across 20 feet of dusty trail. 2 men who'd once trusted each other with their lives, now on opposite sides of the law. Caleb could see Thornton calculating odds, distances, alternatives. Finally, the marshal sighed again. "There's Apache raiders about 5 miles south, whole band of them, moving north. Man would be a fool to ride that direction." Caleb understood. "Good thing we're heading east then. Good thing. Thornton turned his horse. I'll report that I tracked you to the Apache lands but lost the trail. By the time anyone else picks it up, you'll be ghosts. Jim, thank you. The marshal looked back. Don't thank me. Just be happy. Be alive. For both of us who lost everything. He rode away without another word. Caleb and Eliza sat in silence until he was out of sight, then turned south toward the Apache lands. They camped that night in a box canyon Caleb remembered from his hunting days. A small spring provided water, and overhanging rocks offered shelter. As they sat by their small fire, Eliza finally spoke about the encounter. He loved her too, Sarah. It wasn't a question. Caleb nodded. Jim was sweet on her before I came along. Always wondered if she made the right choice. She did. Eliza touched his arm. A woman knows when she's found the right man, even if he doesn't believe it himself. That night they made love under the stars, urgent and desperate, as if trying to claim each other before the world tore them apart. Afterward, Eliza traced the scars on his chest, each one a story of survival. What are you thinking? She asked. That I should feel guilty, should be mourning my old life, my reputation. But all I feel is free. Freedom's expensive. We'll be running forever. No. He pulled her closer. Once we cross into Mexico, we'll stop running and start living. Find that mountain village. Build something new. A ranch? Why not? I know horses. You're tougher than rawhide. We could make it work. She was quiet so long he thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, what if they find us? Then we face it together. But Eliza, I need you to know something. What happened with your husband? I don't care about the details. Don't care if it was self-defense or murder or something in between. You're not that woman anymore. Just like I'm not the man who rode out on patrol 4 years ago. Who are we then? Two people who chose each other over everything else? That has to be enough. It is, she whispered. It's more than I ever dreamed of. They reached the border after a week of hard riding. The Rio Grande was running low, barely a trickle in some places. They crossed at sunset, their horses picking their way carefully among the rocks. On the Mexican side, Caleb turned for one last look at American soil. His whole life lay behind him. The cavalry, the hunt, the endless pursuit of men who probably deserved mercy more than judgment. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, a life with no guarantees except the woman beside him. Regrets? Eliza asked. No, you? Only that it took so long to find you. They rode into Mexico as the stars came out. Two outcasts building a future on the ashes of their pasts, but their story was far from over. 3 months later, while buying supplies in a dusty Mexican town, Caleb spotted a familiar face. Tom Garrett, brother of the men Caleb had brought in the year before. Tom had sworn vengeance at his brother's hanging. Now he stood across the plaza, hand on his gun, smile cold as winter. Eliza, Caleb said quietly. Go back to the horses. What? She saw Garrett and understood. No, we face things together. Remember? Not this. Please. But it was too late. Garrett was already walking toward them, and he wasn't alone. 2 other men emerged from the cantina, spreading out in a half circle. Well, Garrett called out. Caleb Boone, heard you went soft, took up with a murderer. Guess the mighty do fall. This isn't about her. Tom, it's between you and me. Oh, I don't know. Man who destroyed my family took himself a woman. Seems fair I return the favor. Caleb stepped in front of Eliza. You want me, you got me. But it happens clean. Just you and me. Garrett laughed. Clean? Like it was clean when you dragged my brothers to hang, when you collected blood money on my kin. Your brothers robbed and killed innocent people. They were family! Garrett's face twisted. But you wouldn't understand that. Man who couldn't even protect his own wife and child. The words hit like physical blows. Caleb felt Eliza's hand on his back, steadying him. Walk away, Tom, he said. You've got one chance. Take it. Or what? You'll kill me like you killed all the others. Except you don't have your badge anymore. No law to hide behind, just a washed-up killer trying to pretend he's something else. Garrett was right about one thing, without his badge. Killing these men would be murder. But Caleb had crossed too many lines to worry about one more. Not with Eliza's life at stake. The plaza had gone silent. Locals scattered, knowing the look of men about to die. Somewhere, a church bell tolled the hour. "Your move," Caleb said. Garrett went for his gun. He was fast, but rage made him sloppy. Caleb's shot took him center chest before his pistol cleared leather. The other two men drew, and Caleb put them down with mechanical precision. 3 shots, 3 bodies in the dust. He stood over Garrett, who was still alive but fading fast. The man looked up at him with hatred giving way to surprise. You're faster than you were." "No," Caleb said quietly. "I just have more to lose now." Garrett died with a rattling breath. Caleb turned to find Eliza standing firm, though her face was pale, behind her. Mexican soldiers were running toward the plaza. "We need to go," he said, but she was looking at him with an expression he couldn't read. "You killed them. For me. I killed them so they couldn't kill us. There's a difference. Is there, or is that just what we tell ourselves?" He didn't have an answer. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe there were just choices and consequences. And you lived with both or died trying. They fled before the soldiers arrived, riding hard into the mountains. That night, camped high above the desert, Eliza finally broke the silence. "I don't want you to kill for me again." "I can't promise that." "Then promise you'll try. Promise we'll find that village, build that life. Promise the killing stops here." He pulled her against him. "I promise to try. That's all any of us can do." "It's enough," she said. "It has to be." Far below, the lights of the town twinkled like fallen stars. Behind them lay blood and death. Ahead, somewhere in those dark mountains, lay the possibility of peace. Whether they'd find it or whether their past would finally catch up to them, only time would tell. But for now, they had each other. 2 broken souls trying to build something whole. It wasn't much of a foundation, but it was a start. They found San Miguel de las Montanas after 2 weeks of searching, tucked into a valley so remote that maps disagreed on its existence. The village was little more than adobe houses clustered around a small plaza and ancient church. But to Caleb and Eliza, it looked like paradise. An old Apache woman named Maria owned a cabin an hour's ride from the village, abandoned after her son died of fever. She agreed to rent it for almost nothing, warning them the roof leaked and the well needed cleaning. Caleb paid for 6 months in advance with the last of their money. The cabin sat on the ledge overlooking a narrow valley, surrounded by pine and juniper. It had 2 rooms, a fireplace that drew properly, and a view that stretched for miles. Best of all, it was invisible from the main trail. A person would have to know it was there to find it. They spent the first weeks making it livable. Caleb repaired the roof and cleaned the well while Eliza scrubbed years of dust from the floors and walls. They bought simple furniture from the village carpenter, a few pots from the blacksmith, blankets from the weaver. Slowly, the cabin became a home. Eliza planted a garden in the sandy soil behind the house. Corn, beans, squash, the 3 sisters that would sustain them. Caleb built a small corral and bought 2 horses from a rancher glad to sell to anyone with silver. They fell into a rhythm. Morning chores, afternoon work, evenings by the fire planning a future neither quite believed in yet. The villagers accepted them as Tom and Elizabeth Harper, American settlers seeking a quiet life. If anyone suspected they were running from something, they kept it to themselves. Mountain people understood that everyone had reasons for choosing isolation. 3 months passed in relative peace. Eliza's garden flourished despite her doubts. Caleb broke horses for local ranchers, earning enough to keep them fed. At night, they made love with an urgency born of knowing how fragile happiness could be, how quickly it could be torn away. It was December when the past caught up to them. Caleb was in the village buying supplies when he saw the poster nailed to the cantina wall. His own face stared back at him, alongside Eliza's. The reward had doubled, $1,000 for information leading to their capture. beneath their pictures, in bold letters, wanted for murder in the territory of New Mexico, the shopkeeper, Miguel, noticed him looking. These came yesterday, men from the north, asking questions. What kind of men? The kind with many guns and few smiles. They say these two killed a federal marshal. Caleb's blood ran cold. Thornton. They did not say names, only that the law wants them badly. Miguel studied him carefully. You know, senor, sometimes the wind tears down such posters, especially in winter. That would be unfortunate. Very unfortunate. Perhaps someone should warn anyone who might be interested in such news. Caleb left extra money on the counter and rode hard for home. He found Eliza hanging laundry, humming a tune he'd never heard before. She looked up at his approach, and her smile died seeing his expression. They found us. Not yet, but they're close. Someone killed Jim Thornton, and they're blaming us. She sank onto the porch step. But we were already here when... Doesn't matter. We ran. That makes us guilty in their eyes. He sat beside her, taking her hands. We need to leave. Tonight. No. Eliza. No. Her voice was firm. I'm tired of running. Caleb, tired of looking over my shoulder, jumping at shadows. This is our home. We built something here. They'll come. Then let them come. She stood, pacing the small porch. Where does it end? We run to the next town, the next territory, the next country. Always afraid, always ready to abandon everything at a moment's notice. That's not living, that's just slower dying. He wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come, because she was right. They'd traded one kind of prison for another, and the walls were closing in just the same. What do you want to do? He asked finally. I want to fight, not with guns. I've seen enough killing, but there must be another way. Some truth that will clear our names. The truth doesn't matter to a mob with a rope. Then we make it matter. She knelt in front of him, fierce determination in her eyes. You tracked men for years. Track the truth now. Find out who really killed the marshal. Clear our names. And if I can't, then at least we tried. At least we stood our ground instead of running like guilty people. She touched his face. I can't do this anymore. Caleb, the running, the fear. Either we face this together or what? Or it breaks us, turns us into strangers who happen to share a bed. I won't let that happen. I won't lose you to fear the way I lost myself to it for so many years. That night, they made love with desperate tenderness, as if trying to memorize each other. Afterward, Caleb lay awake planning. If they were going to fight, they needed information, allies, some advantage besides his gun skills. In the morning, he rode back to the village and sought out Father Francisco, the old priest who'd married 24 couples and buried 3 times that many. If anyone knew how to navigate the dangerous ground between American and Mexican law, it would be him. The priest listened to Caleb's carefully edited story, fingers working his rosary beads. You seek redemption, he said finally. I seek justice. There's a difference. Perhaps, but justice without mercy is merely vengeance by another name. The priest studied him. I know who you are. Senor Boone, known since you arrived. The question is not your guilt or innocence, but what kind of man you choose to be now. A man who protects his wife. Your wife? Interesting. I recall no marriage ceremony. Caleb felt heat rise in his face. In their flight and hiding, he'd never thought, Father Francisco smiled. Perhaps we should remedy that? A man fighting for his wife stands on firmer ground than one protecting his lover. She might not. Ask her. That evening, Caleb found Eliza working in the garden, coaxing life from the winter soil. The setting sun painted her in gold, and for a moment, he just watched her. This woman who'd chosen him over safety, over freedom, over life itself. Eliza. She looked up, dirt smudging her cheek. What is it? He went to one knee in the soft earth. Elizabeth Marin, will you marry me? Her hands flew to her mouth. Caleb, not because we're running, not because we're afraid, because I love you, because I want to face whatever comes as your husband, because... She stopped his words with a kiss that tasted of earth and hope and home. "Yes," she whispered against his lips. Yes. Always yes. They married 3 days later in the little church, with Miguel and Maria as witnesses. Eliza wore a simple white dress borrowed from the blacksmith's daughter. Caleb stood in his cleanest shirt, feeling more nervous than he'd ever been facing down outlaws. Father Francisco performed the ceremony in a mix of Spanish and English, blessing their union with words that felt like armor against the world. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed his bride and felt something settle in his chest, a rightness he hadn't known he was missing. They celebrated with a quiet dinner at their cabin, just the two of them and a bottle of wine Miguel had pressed into their hands. As they sat by the fire, Eliza in his arms, Caleb felt possibility stretching before them like an open road. "Mrs. Boone," he said, testing the words. "I like Harper better," she said. "New name for a new life." Mrs. Harper. Then the fire crackled, and outside, wind sang through the pines. For this moment, they were safe. For this moment, they were whole. But in the morning, riders appeared on the ridge above their valley. 6 men, watching the cabin through field glasses. Caleb saw them from the corral and knew their time had run out. "They're here," he told Eliza. She looked up from kneading bread, flour dusting her hands. "How many?" "6 that I can see, probably more. What do we do?" He checked his rifle, his pistol, counted ammunition. Not enough for a siege. Not nearly enough if they were determined. "We give them what they don't expect," he said. "We invite them in. What? They expect us to run or fight. Instead, we welcome them, make our case, show them we're not what they think. And if they don't listen, then we deal with that when it comes." An hour later, the riders approached openly, no longer trying to hide. Caleb recognized the lead man, Bill Patterson, a bounty hunter out of Texas with a reputation for bringing them in dead rather than alive. "Boone," Patterson called from beyond rifle range. "We know you're in there. Come out peaceful, and nobody gets hurt." Caleb stepped onto the porch, rifle cradled but not aimed. "Patterson, long ride from Texas." "Longer from a rope. You killed a federal marshal? Boone, that's hanging for sure, even in Mexico." "We didn't kill Thornton." "Sure you didn't, just like the woman didn't kill her husband." Patterson spit tobacco juice. "Here's the deal. You come quiet, you get a trial, make us work for it, we pack you out over a saddle." Eliza appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Patterson, I'm Elizabeth Harper. Would you and your men like some coffee? You must be tired from your journey." The bounty hunters exchanged confused looks. Patterson's hand twitched toward his gun, then stopped. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for—" "I heard you," Eliza said calmly. "But that's no reason to be uncivilized. My husband and I have a proposal. Listen to it over coffee. If you still want to arrest us afterward, we'll come peacefully." This some kind of trick? "No trick," Caleb said. "Just a chance to hear the truth before more blood gets spilled." Patterson studied them for a long moment. "Any funny business, we start shooting." "Understood." And so 6 bounty hunters found themselves sitting awkwardly around the small table in the cabin, holding cups of coffee and listening to Eliza tell her story. She spoke simply, without drama, about her marriage to Samuel Marin, about the beatings, the forced intimacy, the night he died. "I'm not proud of what happened," she finished. "But I'm not sorry he's dead. I did what I had to do to survive." The men shifted uncomfortably. One, younger than the rest, couldn't meet her eyes. Patterson cleared his throat. "That's a sad tale, ma'am, but it doesn't change the law, and it sure doesn't explain the marshal." "Jim Thornton was a friend," Caleb said. "He let us go. Someone killed him after. Used it as an excuse to up the bounty." "Who?" "That's what I aim to find out. Give us 2 weeks. If we can't prove our innocence by then, we'll turn ourselves in." "You must think I'm stupid." "Boone, let you go so you can run deeper into Mexico." "We're not running anymore," Eliza said quietly. This is our home. We're done being afraid." Something in her voice must have reached them. The younger bounty hunter spoke up. 2 weeks ain't much time. Bill? Shut up, Carson. But others were nodding. These were hard men, but not without humanity. They'd all known women who suffered at violent hands. All knew how the law sometimes failed those who needed it most. Patterson stood abruptly. "I'm going to water my horse. Think about what I want to do. Carson, you watch them." He stomped out, the others following. Carson remained, looking miserable. "You really didn't kill the marshal?" he asked. "No," Caleb said. "Jim was a good man. Whoever killed him wanted us blamed for it." Why? Maybe because someone doesn't want the truth about Samuel Marin coming out. Maybe because $1,000 makes people do terrible things. Carson was quiet. "Then, my sister married a man like that. Like Marin. Took her 2 years to get away. Judge sent her back. Said a wife's place was with her husband. He looked at Eliza. He beat her to death a month later." "I'm sorry," Eliza said softly. "Yeah, well, law ain't always right. Is it?" Patterson returned, the others filing in behind him. His weathered face was unreadable. "Here's what's going to happen," he said. "We're making camp up on the ridge, 2 weeks from today. We come back. You're here. You come willing. You're not. We hunt you to the ends of the earth. That's the deal." "Bill," one of the men protested. "That's the deal." Patterson repeated firmly. "Take it, or we do this the hard way right now." "We'll take it," Caleb said. The bounty hunters left, though Caleb could see their campfire that night, a reminder that the clock was ticking. 2 weeks to solve a murder from hundreds of miles away. 2 weeks to find truth in a world built on lies. "Think they'll keep their word?" Eliza asked as they prepared for bed. "Patterson's hard but fair. If he says 2 weeks, he means it. Then we'd better get started. Tomorrow. Tonight. Let's just be us." They made love slowly, savoring each touch, each moment. Outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the world in white. For now, they were together. For now. It was enough. But time was running out, and somewhere in the vast territory they'd fled. A killer walked free while the innocent stood accused. Caleb rode north through a spring blizzard, leaving Eliza safe with Father Francisco's protection. The journey to Fort Adams took 5 days of hard riding, switching horses at way stations, pushing through snow that tried to erase the trail. He'd learned that Jim Thornton had been killed there, shot in the back outside a saloon 3 weeks after letting them go. The fort town hadn't changed much, still the same collection of rough buildings catering to soldiers' pay and frontier vices. Caleb pulled his hat low and headed for the sutler's store, where information flowed as freely as whiskey. Old Pete, the proprietor, recognized him despite the beard Caleb had grown. "Boone, heard you were dead, or in Mexico, or both. Need information? Pete, about Jim Thornton's killing." Pete's eyes darted nervously. "That's dangerous talk." Caleb laid gold coins on the counter. "Who was asking about me and the woman before Jim died?" Pete pocketed the coins. "Samuel Marin's brother, Lucas, come through with a group of hired guns, asking questions about you and the widow. Jim told them he'd lost your trail at the Apache lands. 2 days later, Jim's dead, and Lucas is spreading word that you doubled back to silence him." Lucas Marin. Caleb remembered him from the wanted poster, Samuel's younger brother, a lawyer from Santa Fe with political ambitions, a man who'd need his family name clean of scandal. Where's Lucas now? Santa Fe, most likely. Word is he's running for territorial legislature. Can't have his brother known as a wife-beater who got what he deserved. Better to have him be the victim of a murderous woman and her outlaw lover. Anyone see who actually shot Jim? Matt Henson says he saw 3 men leaving the alley right after. Didn't recognize them, but one had a funny walk, like his left leg was shorter than his right. Caleb knew that walk. Jack Deaver, a gun for hire who'd do anything for the right price. He'd worked for wealthy families before, cleaning up messes that might hurt their reputations. Thanks, Pete. Boone, be careful. Lucas Marin's got money and influence. You go against him. You better have proof that would convince God himself. Caleb spent 2 more days in Fort Adams, Tracking down witnesses, Matt Henson confirmed seeing the three men. A saloon girl named Ruby remembered Jim arguing with someone the night he died. Not about Caleb and Eliza, but about old cavalry records. The fort's records office had been ransacked the same night. Files burned. The pieces were forming a picture Caleb didn't like. Jim must have found something in those records, something that got him killed. But what? He was leaving town when Carson, the young bounty hunter, appeared from an alley. Figured you'd come here. Carson said, "The others don't know. I told them I was checking the Southern Trail." "Why?" "Because I think you're being set up, and because—" He hesitated. "Because I found this in Jim Thornton's effects. The sheriff was going to burn it, but I convinced him to let me take it." He handed Caleb a leather journal, water-stained and worn. Jim's handwriting covered the pages, notes from his investigation, written in the careful way of a man building a case. Caleb read by lamplight in a rented room, Eliza's name jumping out at him from the pages. Jim had been thorough, interviewing people in Socorro, tracking down facts about Samuel Marin's marriage. What he'd found turned Caleb's stomach. 3 women before Eliza, all married to Samuel Marin, all dead within a year of the wedding. Accidents, the records said. Falls downstairs, kicked by horses, fever that came on sudden. But Jim had found a pattern. Each woman had tried to leave, had sought help from family or church. Each had died soon after. "My God," Caleb muttered. But that wasn't what got Jim killed. The last entries were about Lucas Marin's cavalry service, specifically about a massacre of Apache women and children that had been covered up. Jim had found witnesses, was building a case. The kind of scandal that would destroy a political career before it started. Carson was waiting when Caleb emerged. Bad? Worse, Lucas Marin killed his brother's wives. All of them. Jim found proof, was going to expose both brothers. So Lucas had him killed and framed us for it. 2 birds, 1 stone. Caleb tucked the journal inside his coat. "This is enough to clear our names, but not enough to convict Lucas. Not with his money and connections. What do you need? A witness, someone who saw Lucas's men kill Jim. Or better yet, one of the men themselves. Jack Deaver works out of Magdalena now. Has a ranch he bought with blood money." Carson spit. "Always hated that bastard." "You don't have to." "Yeah, I do. My sister's dead because men like the Marins think they own women. Maybe it's time someone did something about it." They rode for Magdalena together. An unlikely partnership between bounty hunter and reformed prey. The trail led through high country still gripped by winter, and they pushed hard, aware that time was running short. Deaver's ranch sat in a valley outside town, pretentious in its newness. Fresh paint, expensive horses, hired hands who looked more like gunmen than cowboys. Caleb and Carson watched from a ridge, planning their approach. "He won't talk willing," Carson said. "No, but he's got a weakness. Cards. Can't resist a high-stakes game." That night, they set their trap in Magdalena's biggest saloon. Carson played the drunk cowboy with more money than sense, losing hand after hand to local players. When Deaver arrived for his nightly game, he couldn't resist such easy prey. Caleb waited in the shadows as Carson lost steadily, complainingly loudly about his luck. Other players dropped out, sensing trouble. Finally, only Deaver and Carson remained. One last hand. Carson slurred. "All I got left against that pretty pot." Deaver smiled like a wolf. "Your funeral, boy." The cards were dealt. Carson pushed forward a leather pouch. "That ain't all I got. Information worth plenty to the right people." "What kind of information?" "About who really killed Marshal Jim Thornton. See, I was there, saw the whole thing. Been trying to decide what to do with what I know." Deaver's eyes sharpened, though he tried to look casual. "That's so? Man's got to protect himself, knowing things can be dangerous or profitable." They played the hand in tense silence. Deaver won, as expected, and reached for the pot. "About that information," he said. "Like I said, dangerous to know things. Man could end up like the marshal, or he could end up rich if he knew how to keep his mouth shut." Carson leaned forward conspiratorially. What if I told you I knew where Boone and the woman were hiding? Worth something to the right people. Deaver's greed overcame his caution. Lucas Marin would pay well for that. Just like he paid for... He caught himself. For what? Nothing. But if you really know where they are... Oh, I know. Carson grinned. Matter of fact, Boone's right behind you. Deaver spun, hand going for his gun, but Caleb was already there. He pressed his Colt to Deaver's temple. Hello, Jack. We need to talk about Jim Thornton. They took Deaver to an abandoned line shack outside town. It didn't take much persuasion to make him talk. The man was a coward without his hired guns. He spilled everything, desperate to save his skin. Lucas Marin had hired him to kill Thornton and frame Caleb and Eliza. The marshal had been getting too close to family secrets that would ruin Lucas's political dreams. Deaver had shot Jim from behind, then spread the story about the fugitives doubling back. He'll kill me if he knows I talked. Deaver whined. Maybe, Caleb said. Or maybe you'll hang for murdering a federal marshal. Your choice. Testify against Lucas or take the fall alone. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. They tied Deaver secure and rode hard for Fort Adams. Time was running out. Only 3 days left before Patterson's deadline. They delivered Deaver to Colonel Morris, the fort commander who'd known and respected Jim Thornton. The colonel listened to Deaver's confession, read Jim's journal, his face growing darker with each page. Lucas Marin, he said finally. I should have known. Jim was getting close to something that had that weasel scared. It's enough to clear us? Caleb asked. More than enough. I'll wire the territorial governor immediately. Your names will be cleared within the day. And Lucas? Will be arrested before he knows what hit him. Jim deserves justice. And by God, he'll have it. Caleb felt a weight lift from his shoulders. They'd done it. Against all odds. They'd found the truth. There's a reward for solving Jim's murder, the colonel added. $500. It's yours if you want it. Give it to Jim's widow, Caleb said. We just won our lives back. He and Carson rode south through the night, pushing exhausted horses toward Mexico and the cabin where Eliza waited. As dawn broke over the mountains, they saw Patterson's camp on the ridge, the bounty hunters just starting to stir. Patterson met them at the cabin, rifle in hand. The other hunters spread out behind him. Cutting it close. Boone, 1 more day and... It's done. Caleb handed him the telegraph from Colonel Morris, clearing their names and detailing Lucas Marin's arrest. We're free. Patterson read it twice, then nodded slowly. Well, I'll be damned. You actually did it. Man's got to protect his wife, Caleb said, pulling Eliza against him. Wife? Patterson's eyebrows rose. When did that happen? While you were camped on our ridge, Eliza said sweetly. Father Francisco performed the ceremony. You're welcome to verify it with him. Patterson actually smiled. No need, ma'am. Man who'd ride into hell for a woman, then turn around and solve a murder to clear her name. That's a husband, legal or not. The bounty hunters prepared to leave, their job no longer valid. Carson shook Caleb's hand. What you did for your sister. Caleb said quietly. She'd be proud. Maybe. Think I'll hang up the bounty hunting. Try something else. Farming, maybe. Something that builds instead of tears down. As the riders disappeared over the ridge, Caleb and Eliza stood together on their porch, watching the sun climb over the mountains. Their names were clear. The past no longer hunted them. They were free to build the life they'd dreamed of. What now? Eliza asked. Now we live. We raise horses. We plant crops. We have children who'll never know what it's like to run. She kissed him, long and sweet. I love you. Caleb Boone. Harper, he corrected. Caleb Harper. I think I'll keep the new name. Fits better with the new life. The Harpers of San Miguel, she mused. I like it. They went inside together, leaving the past on the porch with the morning shadows. There would be challenges ahead, there always were, but they'd face them together, No longer as fugitives, but as free people who'd fought for their truth and won. In the kitchen, Eliza started breakfast while Caleb stoked the fire. Simple domestic tasks that felt sacred after everything they'd endured. Outside, their horses grazed in the corral. The garden showed green shoots pushing through the soil. Life continuing. Life beginning. They'd traveled through darkness to find each other. Through violence and fear to reach this quiet morning. It was enough. It was everything. It was home. 5 years passed like seasons in the mountain valley. The Harper Ranch grew from a struggling homestead to a modest but thriving operation. Caleb bred horses that were sought after throughout the region. Strong, intelligent animals that carried the bloodlines of Judge, who'd miraculously survived the flood and found his way to them months after their arrival. Eliza's garden had expanded into cultivated fields. She taught the village children to read and write in the little schoolhouse they'd helped build. Finding the teaching career she'd once dreamed of in Ohio, her past as the runaway bride became nothing more than whispered legend, fading like morning mist. Their greatest joy played in the dusty yard. 3-year-old Sarah Emma Harper, named for the ghosts they'd learned to honor rather than mourn. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's steady gaze, a child born free of the shadows that had shaped her parents. It was a Tuesday morning when the past came calling one last time. Eliza was hanging wash while little Sarah played with corn-husked dolls. A rider appeared on the valley trail. Unusual, as visitors were rare. As he drew closer, Eliza recognized the weathered face beneath the gray hat. Bill Patterson. She called into the house. "We've got company." Caleb emerged, rifle in hand from old habit, though he lowered it seeing their visitor. Patterson dismounted slowly, age showing in his movements. "Mrs. Harper, Caleb." He touched his hat brim. "Sorry to intrude." "You're welcome here," Eliza said, meaning it. "Coffee?" They sat on the porch, Sarah eyeing the stranger with curious boldness. Patterson looked older, tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. "Heard you did well for yourselves," he said. "Ranch looks good. We've been blessed." Caleb replied. "What brings you this way? Bill?" Patterson was quiet for a moment, watching Sarah chase a butterfly. "I'm done with bounty hunting, turning in my guns. Figured I owed you folks a visit before I disappeared into whatever comes next." "Why us?" "Because you changed something in me. That day 5 years ago, when she invited 6 armed men in for coffee instead of shooting." He looked at Eliza. "Made me remember that people are more than just bounties. Started thinking about all the men and women I'd brought in. How many were guilty? How many were just desperate?" "We were both," Eliza said softly. "Maybe, but you were also human beings deserving of a chance. I forgot that for a long time." He pulled out a worn envelope. "Anyway, thought you should see this. Letter from Colonel Morris at Fort Adams." Caleb read it aloud. Lucas Marin had been convicted of conspiracy to murder Jim Thornton, along with ordering the deaths of his brother's previous wives. He'd hang within the month. The letter also mentioned that Samuel Marin's estate had been liquidated, with compensation paid to the families of his victims. "There's a bank draft," Patterson said. "Your portion, Mrs. Harper, $5,000. Eliza stared at the paper. "I don't want his money. It's not his anymore. It's yours. Justice of a kind." "What would I do with it?" "Build something good," Caleb suggested. Something Samuel would have hated. They were quiet, watching Sarah discover a lizard with delighted squeals. Finally, Eliza nodded. "A school. A real school for the village, with books and supplies, and a fund for women who need to escape bad situations." She looked at Patterson. "Would you help manage it? A man who's learned to see people as human would be good at deciding who really needs help." Patterson's weathered face showed surprise. "I'm no charity worker. Neither were we," Caleb pointed out. "People change." The old bounty hunter considered this, then nodded slowly. "Might be nice to help folks for a change instead of hunting them." He stayed for dinner, sharing stories that were carefully edited for young ears. Sarah took to him immediately. climbing on his lap and demanding he make his horse do tricks, watching the hardened manhunter gently braiding flowers into his horse's mane at a child's insistence. Caleb felt the last of his old life fade away. As twilight painted the mountains purple and gold, Patterson prepared to leave. "One more thing," he said, pulling out a package wrapped in oilcloth. "Found this in an estate sale in Denver. Thought you should have it." Caleb unwrapped it carefully, his breath catching. It was a photograph, Sarah and Emma at Fort Sumner, taken just weeks before their deaths. He'd thought all pictures were lost in the fire. How? Photographer kept copies of all his work. When I heard his studio was closing, I went looking. Patterson mounted his horse. Man needs good memories to balance the bad ones. "Bill," Eliza called as he turned to go. "You said you're giving up bounty hunting. What will you do?" He smiled, years falling from his face. "Think I'll try building something for a change. Maybe help run a school. Look after folks who need it. See if an old hunter can learn new tricks." They watched him ride away. This man who'd once come to arrest them now transformed into something like a friend. Change was possible. Caleb reflected. Redemption was real. People could choose to be better than their worst moments. That night, after Sarah was asleep, Caleb and Eliza sat by their fire. The photograph of his first family sat on the mantel next to a sketch of their daughter, past and present together, pain and joy intertwined. "Any regrets?" Eliza asked, echoing her question from years before. "No, you? Only that it took so long to find this life." She leaned against him. "Do you think we've paid enough for what we did?" "I think payment isn't the point anymore. Living well, helping others, raising our daughter to be better than we were, that's what matters." A coyote howled in the distance, and Eliza shivered despite the warmth. "Sometimes I dream about that night, Samuel's face, the blood. I know. I dream about the men I've killed, but then I wake up and see what we've built from those ashes." He kissed her temple. "The dreams fade. Life grows stronger. Promise?" "Promise." They made love with the tenderness of long partnership. Bodies familiar yet still capable of surprise. Afterward, they lay listening to the night sounds, wind in the pines, horses shuffling in the corral, their daughter's peaceful breathing from the next room. Dawn came gently to their valley, light spilling like honey over the peaks. Caleb rose to tend the horses, finding Eliza already in the kitchen, Sarah on her hip. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the small space. "Papa!" Sarah reached for him, and he swung her up, her laughter bright as mountain water. "Morning, little one. Ready to help with the horses?" "Yes." "Can I ride Dusty?" "If Mama says so." They worked together through the morning chores, a family shaped by violence but defined by love. Patterson's visit had stirred old memories, but, like dust in sunlight, they settled again into peace. By noon, villagers began arriving for Eliza's weekly reading class. Children and adults alike crowded into their front room, eager to learn. Caleb watched from the doorway as his wife patiently guided weathered hands through forming letters, her voice gentle with encouragement. This was their life now. Not perfect. Perfection was for fairy tales. But good, solid, real. That evening, as purple shadows stretched across their valley, the Harper family sat on their porch. Sarah played with the barn cat while her parents watched the sun gild the mountaintops. Somewhere out there, Bill Patterson was starting his own transformation. Lucas Marin was facing justice. The world turned on its ancient axis, indifferent to human struggles, yet somehow blessed by human choices to be better. "What are you thinking?" Eliza asked. "That we made it, against all odds. We made it to the other side." She took his hand, calloused fingers intertwining. Together, always together. Sarah abandoned the cat to climb into her father's lap, small arms wrapping around his neck. "Tell me a story, Papa." "What kind of story?" "About when you were a hero." Caleb looked at Eliza over their daughter's head. "I wasn't a hero, little one, just a man who learned to love again." "That's a hero," Sarah insisted with 3-year-old certainty. Maybe she was right, Caleb thought. Maybe the greatest heroism wasn't in the killing he'd done as a bounty hunter, but in the choosing to stop, in building instead of destroying, in loving after loss. Once upon a time, he began, there was a man who thought his heart had turned to stone, as his voice wove a tale suitable for young ears. Eliza leaned against his shoulder. The mountains stood eternal around them, witnesses to all they'd endured and overcome. In the garden, green things grew from soil that had once seemed too harsh for life. In the corral, horses descended from Judge grazed peacefully. They'd traveled through darkness, both of them, to find this light. A bounty hunter who'd promised no mercy had learned to give it. A fugitive bride had found her freedom not in running, but in standing still. Together, they'd discovered that redemption wasn't a destination but a daily choice, made in small moments and quiet victories. The stars emerged one by one, ancient lights blessing their small corner of the world. Sarah fell asleep in her father's arms, trusting in a safety her parents had fought to create. Caleb carried her inside, tucking her into the bed he'd built with his own hands, in the house that sheltered their improbable love. Later, as Caleb and Eliza prepared for bed, she paused by the window. "Look," she whispered. A rider was passing on the distant trail, heading north, too far to identify, but something in the set of the shoulders suggested Patterson, riding toward whatever new life awaited him. "Think he'll find what he's looking for?" Eliza asked. "If we could, anyone can." They stood together in the darkness, two souls who'd saved each other, watching the rider disappear into the vast promise of tomorrow. Behind them, their daughter slept peacefully. Before them, the future stretched bright with possibility. They'd been the bounty and the hunter, the runaway and the pursuer. Now they were simply the Harpers of San Miguel, horse ranchers, teachers, parents, proof that even the most broken people could choose to heal, that love could bloom in the harshest ground, that mercy could triumph over judgment. The coyote called again, wild and free in the darkness. This time, neither of them shivered. They were home. Thank you so much for joining us here at the Wild West Campfire and listening to this tale of love, redemption, and second chances in the unforgiving frontier. We're curious to know where in the world you're listening from tonight. Whether you're by a real campfire or cozy in your home, drop a comment below and let's connect across the miles. If these stories of the Old West touch your heart, please subscribe to Wild West Campfire and share your thoughts about Caleb and Eliza's journey. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward that horizon.